There, I'm Anna with VSAC, and I am here talking with Colonel Laura Caputo, the Director of Air Operations for the Vermont National Guard. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about her work. So, Laura, I'll have you start by telling us, what do you do for work?
Okay. Well, as I was describing earlier, Anna, it's hard to describe what I do because I've been in the military for 30 years and really I've had three different big jobs. My first one was I was a pilot, and then I moved over into a new career field as an intelligence officer. And currently right now, the role I'm serving in is as the Director of Air Operations for the Vermont National Guard. And what that means is any National Guard unit has what we call a state mission. And that mission is to help the state that they live in when the governor requests our assistance during any type of an emergency. And these days, it's a really good example. The state of emergency that was declared for the pandemic required that we help the state with many different things like vaccine distribution and vaccine implementation. We also helped hand out meals through food distribution. So my job is to ensure that we get Air National Guard personnel to those missions that are qualified and ready to go. Does that describe it?
That's great. Thanks. And I think for my next question, I'm going to skip ahead a second and then maybe combine a couple. So I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about your education and career background, and maybe kind of along the way with those different roles, talk a little bit about what those jobs entail?
Yeah, absolutely. To be an officer in the military, part of your formal education is very standard, like many other professions. To become an officer, you are required to have a bachelor's degree. So following high school, I went on to college. I went to University of Illinois and I earned a bachelor's of science in biochemistry. But that really was the end of where my formal civilian education went. After that, all of the rest of the education I received was mostly through military training programs or a few other professional certificated programs that happen outside of the military. And then that amount of education, I just can't even begin to go over. There are so many. And when I was a pilot, they put me through a year of intense pilot training as an intelligence officer. That was an 8-month course in Texas. Then there's lots of professional development educational schools that I attended. And quite honestly, I mean, just a lot of on the job, what we would call informal education. I did a lot of that as well.
That's great. Thanks. What is one of your favorite things about your work?
Beyond a shadow of a doubt, my favorite thing about my work is the people that I work with. I have, when you join the military, you join an organization where people have come from all over the country, really even all over the world. And I've met so many different and interesting people. My strongest friendships to date are the people that I met in my military career. So for sure, this group of people that I work with who all kind of joined with this idea to serve the country has really made for just an incredible bond between friends. So that has been absolutely the best part of my job. Outside of the people, I would say regarding the job itself, probably the greatest thing about the military is there are so many different duties you can be assigned to. So boredom doesn't really ever seem to be a factor for us in our line of work. So I would say that's probably, outside of the people, that'd be my second favorite thing about the job.
That's great. Thanks. What are some of the things you find the most challenging about the work?
Definitely one of the things that is the most challenging is when you work in a government organization, they're often regulated for good reason. However, learning the regulations and learning the protocols and learning the processes can become confusing and challenging, mentally challenging sometimes, because sometimes you can learn about protocols and procedures that maybe you don't understand the intent of and they feel frustrating. But I would say that learning all of those regulations and procedures and protocols, that really is probably the most challenging part of my job.
That makes sense. Could you walk us through what a typical day might look for you, and if you want to kind of pick one of the careers that you've had over the course of your career, or maybe like talk about a few of them, that's fine.
Sure. I'm probably going to just talk about my favorite job so far in the military, which was, well, the years that I was flying as a pilot, the first 15 years I spent in the military, those were probably those were my favorite duties that I had. And my first assignment was as an instructor pilot. So I spent 3 years teaching all of the other lieutenants that were in pilot training, teaching them how to fly. And I think during that tour, I just really learned that I enjoy teaching. And there was never a dull moment. A day there looked like a very long day. Our schedule was for the most part Monday through Friday. And any given day, you would report to work anywhere between about 6 a.m. and as late as 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., depending on if you were night flying that week. And then we typically worked about a 10, maybe 12-hour day, and you flew once or twice a day with a student. And so you'd start out the day with a big briefing to all the students, and we would talk about emergency procedures. And that took an hour or two. That was an hour or two of actual sort of academic training for the students. And then after that, we would pair off with the individual students, and you would go fly a training sortie. And even though the training sorties were only about an hour and 15 minutes, you would talk about the training sortie for an hour. Then it would take you about 2 hours to leave the desk and go get all your gear on, step to the plane, go fly the training sortie, and get back to the desk. And then once you got back to the desk, you typically got something to eat because you were starving. And you would talk about what you did for that hour. And that was called the debrief. And then oftentimes you would do it again. You'd do it a second time in a day. And if you didn't fly a second time with a student, you would be sitting one-on-one with different students, just helping them study and helping them learn the art of flying. So that was what a typical day looked like as an instructor pilot. They were long days, but they were so much fun because, when anyone is learning something, mistakes happen. And it was sort of like being on like a close-knit sports team. You laughed together, you suffered through pain together. It was really a lot of camaraderie.
That's great. Thanks.
Sure.
What do you think would make someone a good fit for this line of work?
I think that somebody who enjoys structure or maybe needs structure. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I enjoyed the military so much. It brought structure to my life that I think I was kind of craving. I think that somebody who does not like to maybe sit behind a desk, someone who wants their work to be sort of outside of a building, I think that's a really good attribute to have in the military. Somebody who likes teamwork and really enjoys working with people, I think that's another really important attribute. And without a shadow of a doubt, I mean, probably one of the most important things is if someone is honestly grateful for the country that we live in and they want to give back in some capacity, I think that is probably the most important attribute because it's a line of service. You're serving the country. So it's probably the most important attribute.
That's great. Thanks.
Sure.
If a student is interested in military service, what can they be doing now to kind of prepare themselves for that? Are there obviously ROTC at some point, but classes, volunteer work, stuff at home, like conversations they should be having, that sort of thing?
Well, probably the most important thing they could do is ensure they're in good physical health, because ironically, one of the biggest reasons we lose people who are interested in the military is because they don't pass the physical fitness standards and the health requirements. So that's probably the first thing that they could do. And that's easy. You can just Google what the physical requirements are for military service. That's one thing that they could do. A second thing they could do, which is really pretty easy, is just enter into a conversation with somebody who has served, because enlisting in the military or becoming an officer in the military, it's not as easy as maybe just filling out an application with a company and getting hired. It's a pretty long process and there's a lot to learn and understand. So I think that talking with somebody who has served before or talking with a recruiter is a really good thing to do. And then, of course, like with everything, I mean, stay in school. stay in school and get an education. And it wouldn't just help you for a military career, it'd be really important for any career, but it's especially important right now in the Air Force. You have to have a high school diploma or at least a GED to serve. And then again, if you wanted to be an officer, you have to have a bachelor's degree. So education is very, very important.
If a student's thinking about being an officer and a bachelor degree, are there types of, majors or focuses that are more helpful than others?
Yeah, well, I can only speak to the Air Force since that's the service I'm in, but for sure, the Air Force tends to focus more on STEM career fields than others. It does not mean that you couldn't serve with a bachelor's degree that is not in STEM, but if you wanted to choose a path that would really help facilitate a career in the military, a degree in science, technology, engineering, or math would really, really help.
That's great. Thanks.
Sure.
Anything else you would want to share with students about your career or just words of wisdom for them?
Absolutely. I sometimes think that I'm the poster child for the military because the only reason originally when I signed up for ROTC in college, the only reason I signed up is I had gotten into college, but I did not have enough money to pay for all of it. I had enough money saved for my freshman year. And a friend in high school had told me about ROTC and said, well, they might pay for college. So I signed up without a scholarship, but that freshman year when I was in it, I applied for a scholarship and they paid for all my college. So I didn't know anything about the military. I didn't even know there was a difference in rank structure between officers and enlisted. I learned it all as I went. By the time I graduated, I learned that I definitely wanted to serve. And so I think the most important thing that I would really like to communicate to the students is if you know nothing about it, it's 100% worth looking into. I never thought I would be sitting here in the uniform 30 years later. I have been given skills that are incredibly marketable. I have flown all over the world. I have met incredible people. I met my husband in the Air Force and now we're married with 2 kids. So that was great. So really that I think is one of the most important things I'd like to convey is really consider it as an option. And especially for the females, because there are so many awesome jobs that I think a lot of young women don't think about that are open to them that they would enjoy. So that I think is what I'd really just mostly like to convey.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure thing.